Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus. For this episode, we're still going to do a show and everything, but I figured I'd dispense with the usual comedy bits up front. We just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on now. We're recording this on the late evening of the 23rd, and it seems that as of about half an hour ago, Russian military forces have started moving into East Ukraine. We were talking about this a little bit before we got on the show, and we've been talking about it in general over the past couple weeks between myself and the black metal guy. We don't typically talk politics on the show, and we don't have a special political position to take on this. You know, whatever your opinions on the self-determination of the breakaway publics in Eastern Ukraine may be, we don't really have a dog in that fight. But I think we can both agree that we're not happy about this turn of events.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you've been following it a lot more closely than me. The death metal guy knows, I try to insulate myself from the news so I don't go insane.
Yeah.
And you know, with world historical shit like that, you know, often, right, this is a standoff that has happened many times before and nothing has come of it. Or not nothing. Bad shit has come of it to some degree, right? But it hasn't come to a head in the way that it is now. Mm-hmm. And so you know way more about what's going on right now than I do. But yeah, it's just what we were saying before I came on, is it's just really, really sad.
Yeah. There's obviously, and we have no interest in debating the historical and political intricacies of that. I think we can both just say, well, or I'll say for myself at least, that I'm not a big fan of what I perceive as what I would call pointless military venturism, regardless of what nation is committing it. And a lot of people are saying that, not taking a political side in this is taking a side. I disagree, because I feel like in a situation like this, the primary people suffering are going to be Ukrainian civilians who have little to nothing to do with the realities this conflict is about.
Yes, it's a war that, for many reasons, it's happening in some way because of deep emotional reasons on both sides, and it doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. And as we were talking about before, it's those are always the ugliest wars.
Yeah.
It's and it seems you were talking about Kiev getting shelled right now, or perhaps bombed from the air or something.
Yeah, possibly. There's a bunch of explosions reported, but people aren't really sure of the origin yet.
Yeah. I mean, could that just be could that be sort of like, Russian black ops just blowing shit up on the ground? Like terrorists? I
mean, I don't know. I don't want to speculate about something like that, but we can both say that if it does turn out that there is Russian military action in Kiev, well, obviously that is far, far in excess of what Putin was suggesting.
Yes, if the plan is to visit this on Ukrainian civilians and Ukraine, the nation of Ukraine in general, right? Yes, that is, it's sort of prideful and cruel in the worst ways, right? Yeah, not prideful and cruel, but not in the cool way.
Yeah, we were talking. This is actually, ironically, this is the opposite of what we like about black metal, because this is a lot of this appears to me to be a lot of sort of supposed heroic ethos that is disguising sort of naked imperialist ambitions, and I'm not a big fan of that.
It's there's a I think I have it's like I find myself, I understand the cases. Both sides have a compelling historical case to make, and sort of a compelling national mythological case to make. But if I'm observing from the outside, it's you have to feel for a small valiant people defending their homeland, right?
Yeah, no, of course.
And that happened to my mom's family too.
Yeah,
so it's it's just really sad.
Yeah, I don't think we have a ton more to say about it, apart from to the people of Ukraine who have no part to play in this conflict. Be safe and God bless.
Yes. Back from more discussion of the land war in Europe, we are here with a black metal demo by Serpent Dweller. This is the second demo by Serpent Dweller. The vocalist of this band is a friend of the show. We reviewed his first demo over a year ago, I think.
It was pretty early on, yeah.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to pull it up on Bandcamp here. And I had the tab open and then it disappeared. It was pretty, it was almost exactly a year ago, February 2021.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's, which I guess in some way was early on, right? But, so this is his second demo, and it's, from what I remember, it's him and another guy, and the other guy's handling all the instruments. It is the first one we remember being kind of a idiosyncratic, high velocity black metal that seemed informed by that seemed of a piece with the contemporary trend towards triumphant melody and BM, but like it was getting a lot of its DNA from like grinding hardcore, like His Hero Is Gone, and also maybe Funeral Doom, which is still listed on their Bandcamp as a genre. Mm-hmm. Like a sense of melody from Funeral Doom, not velocity.
Yeah.
I think the Funeral Doom thing is still here, which we could discuss, but this is it's a much more focused effort. It's really, I mean, I have to say, like, it's a quantum leap forward from the last one in terms of focus and power and memorability of the songs. It is it's also sort of cleaned up and less idiosyncratic, but it's still really unique. I think you're gonna love this, and I think I know which band you're gonna compare it to.
Okay.
Basically, this, and to me, this seems like a much more convincing attempt at a certain sound attempted by certain bands I don't like that much or don't like at all.
Okay. Now you got to write it down on a card and show the audience.
Right. I'll stick it on my I'll like stick it on your forehead or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with just first 2 minutes of the first track. This is very riff oriented, direct stuff. So just first 2 minutes of the first track, Perception Without Form. Yeah, so what do you make of that?
I like that a lot. I'm trying to guess who you think I'm going to compare it to, because I'm trying to think of something that I like that you don't, and you think it's a better execution of the idea. Honestly, the first thing this strikes me as is it reminds me a lot of Narbaleth, in a way.
Yeah, no, okay, it does. And Narbaleth, I like... Okay, I think you're going to get that thing next when I'm going to play another sample that will nail it for you. This does remind me of Narbaleth. A question I was going to ask is... Yeah, so... I mean, the thing that really gets... So, like, the main riff on that, right? I can sort of, like, take or leave. It's a solid verse riff, right? But then when he brings in the leads there, they're just, like...
Oh, the leads are the center there.
The leads are so powerful, that low-end trim. It just cuts through the sound, and it's like a death metal technique, but it doesn't sound like death metal at all.
Well, it's got that huge kind of swaying motion that we're now kind of starting to associate with like South American and kind of like Spanish language black metal in general now.
Yeah, and these are Latino dudes from LA.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that whole kind of like processional but kind of like flourishing gesture with that lead guitar, that's very Narbaleth, or it's even very like Ancient Spheres or something from last year.
Yeah, and you can hear maybe some of the Funeral Doom in that too, as in like it's not so much a death metal kind of single lead as it is like a beefy, low-end, single-string, mournful Funeral Doom riff.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
But it's like harmonized in a really cool way. I don't think it's a drone string. Maybe it is a drone string. Maybe he's just using a drone string on single parts, not on the whole phrase, but on certain parts of it.
Well, it's harmonized in an interesting way. He's because he's like pulling in and out of sync with the first guitar line. So it's kind of like emerging above the surface of the water and then diving back below it, that kind of thing. It's really cool, and I like that. It's not just like about the riff per se, it's about execution. There's been a lot of consideration on how do we execute this in a way that makes it especially effective.
I like that. That's a very good point. This is black metal that certainly appeals to the current desire for big, flourishing consonant riffs and triumphant vibes, but the performance is really important, right? His guitar playing is important. It's not just riffs cut and pasted, and also there's a cool structure there, right? There's like there's the first chorus and then the second chorus. There's an A-B variation to that first sort of like dive phrase. It almost sounds more like a turnaround at first. It's just a really powerful turnaround. And then it locks in to a chorus riff or big hook riff that's based on the same sort of swooping low-end trem thing. And that is very cool, and it sustains the idea. And other than that, the song is sort of like basic structured, right? It just goes back to the verse riff and then, hits that stuff again. But it works perfectly. Here's, I guess the thing no, never mind. So next one, I think we don't need to play this for very long. I just think once we play this, you'll know what I am talking about. So yeah, we're going to go to the beginning of the last track, The Path of Death's Shadow, which I think I had as a rough rehearsal track on my desktop for a while, because when I first listened to this, I was like, I know that song. I've heard that. That song's great. And then I was like, oh shit, that was that random unlabeled MP3 that I was like, what is this? But the sound is so much bigger here, and it's just, this is pretty vast stuff.
Okay, so it's Imha Tarakat, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, when I heard the shreddy lead guitar stuff, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and once you hear it there, you can hear it in the shred intro to the first track too, right?
Yeah. Now
it's a little more mournful sounding on the first track.
Yeah,
but,
this is like a more muted, kind of more like black, especially black metal-y take on that idea. There's a way you can think of it. I don't know if I'd even call Imha Tarakat like really a straight up black metal band.
Well, that's a good segue. I was going to raise that about this. So I think that. So yeah, like the main difference for me is I just think these guys are better at writing. So Imha Tarakat has fantastic energy, and the bursts of shred soloing are sick. But I've just followed his stuff for a long time and never found the regular riffing impressive. Some I like, some I really don't like. This is, this band has the regular riffing locked in. And there's all kinds of pyrotechnics in the regular riffing that are being pulled off, like those diving trem things before.
Yeah.
So I like this better. But a question about this is that this record does not feel like a black metal record to me. And I've listened to it on the last, and I really, really like it. That's not a knock on it at all. It's spiritually authentic. It's passionate. It shows a deep knowledge of black metal riffing and tradition. This is not, there's nothing posery about it. It's just in this territory of like stuff that seems to be pushing beyond black metal, and where you can, or away from it in weird ways, and where you can look at something like Syndexio and be like, okay, this sounds weird, and it's droning and sort of mid-tempo and obscure and synthy, right? This in many ways is doing the most visceral things that we like about black metal, but with a really different emotional inflection.
You see, I mean, I would say this is closer to black metal, like, you know, capital B, capital M, we're using this as a specific, like, genre definition term. I think this is closer to black metal than Amon Tarakat is. Because, like, I think if you strip away some of the pyrotechnic stuff, the bed of this reminds me of kind of, like, advanced DSBM riffing. Like some of the simpler stuff you would hear from Nyctalgia. Or Sturban.
I think they really admire the French bands. Also, I think there's a lot of likes. Yeah.
But I get what you're getting at, and I think this sounds like, to me, this sounds like guys who started a black metal band, but really, really, really like death metal and hardcore. Also.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting is just like the vibe is like, or like. The music has this, just, if you listen to the whole thing, it just has this majestic sweep to it. But the melodies aren't really coming from folk music or classical. They seem to be coming from film soundtrack. Which is, it makes me think of, like, I don't know, like a Tree of Life or something, like a Terrence Malick film. Or even like the kind of epic that you get in... Certainly closer to the kind of epic that you get in the more, the newer skepticism stuff.
Yeah, it's mournful, but it's also about vastness and space, and, you know, more shades beyond being sad.
I think this is not very. I don't think it's sad music. I think it's very, very sentimental. And it's sort of sentimental in a way that links it to these kinds of, like, you know, I don't know, high budget art movie, right? Or something like that. Like the Terrence Malick stuff. Or that links it to, emotionally, at times, it can feel a little like Godspeed or something. Who's also have a sense of melody that comes more from sort of cinematic stuff. And it feels very American in the melodies. I guess that's a point. Both of those things are very American. But it's like... But the energy is fantastic. I'm just wondering if, like, we're starting to get to a point where there's... Obviously, there's always going to be real black metal of various kinds. But are we getting to a point where, like... It comes back to the, like, we need new names for these things. Like, this is definitely lunar metal, right? This is clearly in the same constellation as Narbaleth, or as a number of other bands with that kind of vibe, right? It's more sort of, and they have various degrees of and relation to black metal, right? And the antithesis might be like solar metal stuff, some of which is very black metal, also, some of which is really not at all.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just, is this sort of nocturnal, diurnal, lunar, solar thing going to become a more, I don't know, a more apt way of parsing some of the new stuff? Because, like, I understand how this spiritually connects to even really necrotic sort of lunar sounding stuff. It doesn't feel like, I mean, it's obviously like a, you know, an individual feel thing, but, like, also, like, it's like, I listened to this under the moon in the coldest night, in the last really cold night of winter the other night, and it was fucking awesome. I would kind of we've got a lot to move through this show, so we should probably keep moving, but I'll say Rite of Hidden Dreams is a jam. Do you have time for a jam?
I always have time for a jam, buddy.
All right, let's just get through the verse and the chorus.
Well, there's all the French stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, like as soon as that first riff hit, that just that little dyadic thing he was doing at the beginning, it starts like a mutilation riff, and then it goes off in its own direction.
Oh yeah, and the sort of the power chordy riff at the beginning, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but the chorus, right, is like a rousing kind of, like, I mean, it sounds a lot like Total Vernichtung, right? But it also sounds literally like emo, but in a good way. like kind of like gothy, maybe gothy hardcore stuff. It doesn't sound exactly like AFI, but it's a similar energy to the more hardcore AFI.
When emo was wearing eyeliner because they really believed in it.
Yes, but the thing that makes it really good, and kind of like one thing that makes it like cooler to me than a Total Vernichtung riff or whatever, right, is how he's bending all of those notes sideways. There's actually like a really bizarre skronk harmony that hits on one of those chords, and that all seems very informed by that mutilation stuff. And it raises it. Again, it shows the mastery of the tradition, and it sort of it engages with stuff that it very much it engages with the zeitgeist, right? But it does it in a way that is a lot more substantial than other bands grasping after that, I think.
This is a little one Gash, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right, we are back, and a little thought experiment. Black metal guy, if you had just discovered death metal as of, say, 5 years ago, and hadn't heard anything before 2017, and you were asked what are the prevailing themes of death metal, what would you probably say based on what's popular these days?
Triangles. Sort of like constellations and like vortices. Also kind of like Eastern mysticism. What else? Sort of like
space. Probably
aliens.
Yeah, aliens. Yeah. Well, boy, do I have something special for you, because I have a band that's here to prove that death metal is not about any of those things, because they are called...
What could it be about, death metal guy?
Well, black metal guy, this is a band called RazorRape, and they have a new album out called Fucked Beyond Recognition, and they're here to remind everyone that death metal is actually about murder and rape and torture and cannibalism and playing really fast, cool riffs.
Sounds like brutal death metal.
That's an interesting question. It brushes into it. There's some brutal death stuff in a sense, and there's some stuff that you could kind of charitably call slams here and there. But yeah, go ahead.
I guess what I mean is like it's interesting to say that because I think on the notes you've billed this as a straight up death metal record, and what's funny is that those themes, which are fundamental to death metal, have been relegated to brutal death metal.
Yeah,
and also in very, very attenuated form to like OSDM, but that's like sweet death shit. But that's mostly just like zombies killing people, like Night of the Dead, like whatever. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I was actually going to talk about that because so RazorRape is a band that's been around for a while. It's actually its origin is as a one-man project. I'm not sure what the lineup on this record is, but I'm pretty sure they have a full lineup now. And the most immediate comparison I can make to this is the 200 Stab Wounds record from last year, which I really loved and you enjoyed a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what we have here is kind of a similar melange, maybe a little bit grindier than the 200 Stab Wounds. This is faster in general. But you're looking at this combination of old school death metal, kind of 2000s stomping New York stuff, some brutal and slam death, but then here also there's a flair of European deathgrind stuff that kind of differentiates it. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because when I first decided to bring this record on the show, I heard one of the lead tracks and I really liked it. I was like, how is one of the most exciting developments in death metal right now just the idea of bringing gore back into it, which sounds like such an absurd idea. But if you think of it, like, seriously, high-profile death metal records over the past 5 and to a certain degree even 10 years have been thematically completely dissociated from the roots of, being vulgar and being about murder and shit, I mean, even being aggressive to a degree. They haven't really been doing that lately.
These guys seem to have gotten a good system down because the tracks are just like regular, just sort of like classic vicious death metal song titles, but the album covers are all women with the heads of pigs cutting men's dicks off.
Yeah, the woman with the pig head's kind of a mascot for the band. Yes. It seems. It's pretty cool. But okay, these are really short songs, so we're just going to play a couple all the way through. So basically, this record is split into two kinds of songs. You've got one kind that's like a little bit slower, a little bit kind of more breakdown focused and hardcore influenced, and then you got the other half is faster, thrashier, more kind of Cannibal Corpse inspired. All of it's really good. But let's start by listening to all of Ruptured Eye Globe Vivisection, which is going to be a good example of one of those slower, kind of chuggier mosh pit songs.
All right.
Yeah, so that's pretty tough, right?
That's very tough. I like the idea of the one part that sounds like Dissonant Black Death being 2 chords in the middle of just a crushing, like, beatdown slam part.
Yeah, well...
Right? They just throw, like, 2 sort of, like, DSO ulcerate chords in the middle of just this, like, ignorant gutter riff, right? Which is hilarious and cool.
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to bring up, because you made such a great case for it on 200 Stab Wounds.
Thanks.
Cover that record. The whole idea of the sort of Slayer core underpinning of modern death metal. And I feel like a lot of the breakdowny stuff on this record ties really closely to that. I mean, a lot of the trem riffs across this record have sort of a Slayer flair. You know, dissonant and harsh, but not really in the sense that we think of those terms now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's not a lot of trem on that. Did I miss some trem on that one? There's not a lot of single-string trem, right?
There's some just in the blasty section. We'll get more into that.
There's tremming like chords there. That's the more like DSO-y stuff there. But the... but I could have missed some. But the thing that strikes me as really Slayer is the sort of like Slayer core, especially, is the 2-step at the end.
Oh, I thought you'd get a kick out of that part. Yeah.
Oh, I love that part. And what's cool is that it brings back the riff from the beginning of the song. I really liked that. I feel like almost they started with the breakdown riff from the end of the song, because it kind of makes sense as like a grease. The intervals are kind of blues scaly too. It's got almost this kind of southern rock thing, like almost a Pantera thing, like, or like an Every Time I Die thing, like right. That's also the verse riff at the beginning of the track. But they're doing it as a over Slayer beats, so it's just this like wobbly kind of it's just this sort of wiggling pulse riff that sounds kind of obscure and brutal and produces a hardcore effect in a very death metal-y way.
Yeah, I would say that like 200 Stab Wounds, this seems to have a lot of the same DNA, but this definitely leans harder in the fully fledged death metal direction.
Yeah.
Like
for sure.
Yeah, you don't get as many of those riffs where it's like the Rorschach test of whether it's hardcore or not.
There's nothing there that sounds thrashy, per se.
Yeah.
It's also elephant in the room, or should I say pig in the room, is the constant pig squeal vocals.
Yeah,
which is a very death metal.
And it's the most markedly brutal death thing, too.
Yes. Yeah, and it's a thing that, that would distinguish it from something like 200 Stab Wounds. And it is very brutal death, and it is very difficult to assimilate to things outside that. But it's, what's cool, kind of, is that, like, I've never been a huge fan of the Brie Brie. However, here it works. Partly because I think he's got more, like, depth and tone in it. And partly because the songs themselves aren't, one thing with those vocals, you'd always hear them in the context of, like, white belt deathcore songs, right? It would just like, here it is, Whitechapel, the most brutal thing ever, right? Whereas hearing them in the context of things that function much more as sort of direct, grinding hardcore death metal songs, it sort of makes more sense. It's just like, it's an added flavor of just like, oh, that's nasty, instead of just being like, why is there a pig there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something cool going on now between 200 and this record and some other stuff that I've just heard on my own time. It feels like people are now finally getting how to tie old school death metal and like modern brutal death ideas together in a way that makes sense and results in something bigger than just the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I've been really liking hearing more brutal death style vocals in things that are not brutal death.
Yeah, it's fun. Why not?
Yeah.
So let's listen to another one. This is called A Night to Dismember. and this is one of the fast ones. Here's where the thrash is going to come out. So it's like the basic DNA is really similar to 200 Stab Wounds, especially on the more hardcore tracks. You got the skinless, aborted, cannibal corpse kind of across everything. And, the kind of the same stuff we were talking about. But here's where the thrash is going to come out more. You're going to hear more of that cannibal corpse, but then you're also going to get some cryptopsy and maybe some kind of weirder, more deep cut stuff. We'll talk about after this one.
Word.
That Doom Death riff at the end, the like sped up Doom Death riff, makes me laugh every time I hear it.
That was sick. I mean, you could
good.
You could also hear that as like a Sweet Death riff,
yeah.
Oh, literally a dismember. Oh, there's a joke. It's a dismember riff.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are
like the pun. There's a pun in the. There's like a double pun. It's a night to dismember. Haha, funny. And that ends with this like big dismember sort of ever-flowing stream power chord thing.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
yeah. I liked the thrash riffing there, and it's very deathified. More sort of consonant than I was expecting, but in like a cool way. Like it's sort of just like sinister. That first thing where they were doing the where when they bounced off the pedal point, they were just hitting like single note trem. Things in the beginning of the song. That was really cool, and the version of it at the end was really cool too.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the omnipresent things here is going to be the influence from Deranged, who I've talked about a few times on the show. I'm a big Deranged fan, and Deranged is kind of the root of a whole style of Swedish almost brutal death or kind of death grindy stuff. That not a lot of people really think about, but it really is kind of its own stylistic niche within Swedish death metal. People just don't really think about it as a community, but I'm thinking of stuff like Deranged, Immersed in Blood, Sanctified, stuff. A lot of bands that people just don't really care that much about. But yeah, so the thrashy stuff, you're getting a lot of late Cannibal Corpse in there. Or, at least, like early George Fisher Cannibal Corpse. Mm-hmm. And you're also getting Cryptopsy in the way they keep playing with those kind of, those chuggy hardcore rhythms. You can remember on None So Vile tracks like Graves of the Fathers or Benedictine Convulsions, where they're doing these fun sort of like rhythmic inversion tricks with these relatively simple chug riffs. And I really like that a lot, too.
Yeah, I can hear the, Yes, I can hear the... I'm like... I just brain farted the name of the very important Quebecois band you just Cryptopsy. Fucking hell. That was a brain fart. Yeah, I could hear the Cryptopsy thing for sure. And on some of the sort of squiggle thrash riffing as well.
Yeah.
I can hear that. Other thing I was thinking, when I heard the more sort of quote-unquote dissonant chorded things, you're right that it doesn't really sound like Ulcerate or DSO. What if it, especially on this track, it's honestly more like a straightforward, old-school, kind of like Dark Funeral riff, but they're using it to grind, which is awesome. And the thing it reminded me of was a band that has rendered itself completely irrelevant. Do you remember Belphegor?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're still going, dude.
Yeah, I know, but it's just like, it's just one of those bands that just exists now, and it's like, okay, yep, they're doing another one of the skull with a gas mask, right? But, like, it makes me want to revisit it almost, because I back in the day, but they were like Black Death when that meant there was actual death metal in it.
Yes, exactly.
And, like, modern death metal. And so it was sort of like blasting brutal death with retarded dark funeral chords and a kind of porn and gore aesthetic that was very different from other BM at the time.
Oh yeah, dude. Lucifer and Cestus is still a minor classic in my book.
All right, I'm gonna have to revisit that.
It's got a bunch of hot lesbian chicks having sex in front of the devil.
Oh, that's right. That cover is sick.
Being the devil rules.
How's it going? Connor here from Oncology, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right, we are back, and we got something a little bit different for this next segment. Probably one of the highest profile records that we've covered on the show. That I don't know. I go back and forth. Do you think this is going to be relevant to our listeners, or do you think this is going to be pretty left field?
I think it's good to check in with the relative mainstream once in a while, because, like, obviously there's good music being made that's not just being made by a small circle of Estonian pagans. But, like, but it is, but, like, so I think it's good to check in with this stuff when it's of artistic interest, right? I mean, God, that fucking Ruins of Beverest record came out on Nuclear Blast, right?
Oh man, I always forgot that it was on something like that.
Yeah, like that's anyone who wants to know about the state of the art needs to know about that. I told you I kind of want to check out the new Immolation and stuff, right? So. Yeah. I think it makes sense to check in with this stuff. Will it be relevant to our listeners? I think their listeners form. I think there are certain types within them, but they're quite a range. I think some people will dig this.
Yeah.
Some probably already know it. I've known guys who were repping this band like 10 years ago when he was starting out.
Yeah.
And maybe you should bring me up to speed because you've been following him the whole time, right?
To a degree. Well, let me say who it is.
Oh, right.
So today we're covering the new Author and Punisher record titled Krüller, released on Relapse Records. Yeah. So insofar as following Author and Punisher, I've followed him basically since he became more known in the metal scene. Because, so Author and Punisher, I think this is like the 7th or 8th full length that he's done. But basically, when metalheads picked up on him is when he got signed to Housecore Records for like his 4th or 5th record, which is the label that Phil Anselmo.
That's fucking weird.
Yeah, Phil Anselmo picked him up.
So, I originally knew of him from metalheads. I had not heard of him outside that sphere. So I guess we'll get to this. We probably have different. So here's the thing that I mostly remember about it was he makes his own instruments.
Yeah.
Which back in the day probably led me to think, well, okay, maybe that's interesting. Maybe it's a novelty band like Botanist or whatever. Like, whatever. But in principle, I've always been committed to the idea that, like, incorporating biofeedback is one of, like, into things that aren't into electronic instruments, right? is like the next frontier in terms of, so like that he's doing that is pretty cool. So maybe I should be down for that. You know what I mean? And maybe it's dumb I didn't check him out earlier.
Yeah, and so for those who aren't familiar with Author and Punisher, like the black metal guy was saying, you know, the gimmick, quote unquote, it's not a gimmick, it's essential to the quality of the music, is Terrence, the one man behind it, is a mechanical engineer by trade, and he's created an array of just unique, specialized instruments, which, to a certain degree, mostly revolve around functioning as MIDI controllers, but with interesting kind of timbral characteristics. So a lot of what he does is, you know, developing novel ways to kind of simulate conventional instruments. I mean, he does have straight synths that are not necessarily custom, but he also has an array of things that are designed to replicate electronic drums, interesting other kind of sort of analog synth type setups. It's very interesting. He's got some videos online where he gives you kind of a nutshell look at his setup. It's really interesting. It's very cool.
Does he ever like strap on a robot glove and like punch and like the bass hits? Because that's kind of what I assumed it was like. I assumed it was like he like gets in the battle suit and sort of like stomps.
It's kind of close. You're not too far off. It's an array around him. So, for instance, when he's performing live, the drum hits are controlled by a sort of piston setup that he can pump forward and backward. And I believe he has like a button set up to activate different voices, but it also allows him like an analog kind of velocity mapping, so he can hit it softer for lighter stuff. And then
I see. So he's made like an analog drum machine.
Yeah, basically, he's done sort of convoluted analog mechanical.
I get this. So yeah, the whole point is that it's mostly not digital. He's machining it.
Yeah, he's machining it, and I mean the cool kind of abstract kind of musical ideology aspect of it is that to create louder and more intense sounds, he has to physically exert himself harder.
Right. That's the biofeedback thing. Well, that's cool. Well, so everyone who's looking like, what does this look like? You can just search. There's a Boiler Room Berlin live set.
It's very cool, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm watching that on silent right now.
Yeah, so, but musically, okay, so what does he do with all this stuff? Well, it's interesting, because you were talking about knowing people who were kind of following him from the beginning. I had not really heard his really early stuff, but to prepare for this review, I decided to go back and listen to it. And I can see what happened with metalheads picking him up, because the first few records are cool, but very, like, Skinny Puppy vein. They don't have the unbelievable heaviness of his later stuff. So it seems like Author and Punisher got picked up by Housecore Records and then almost accidentally got adopted by the metal scene, you know? Which kind of went in tune with a musical shift into slower tempos, heavier sounds, lots of sub-bass frequencies. And now he refers to himself, and a lot of people refer to him as industrial doom metal. Sorry, I interrupted you. Keep going. No, I mean, that's about it. So he now refers to himself as industrial doom metal. I'd say that's probably a pretty fair characterization, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, which would tie him to Godflesh, right? But it looks like, so the guys I knew who were into him would have been right around 2012 and 13, before Housecore.
Okay, yeah.
But, like, not the first three records. It's, they get listed as...
He did a couple independent releases and then a few more on some small labels. And
he's been going a while. Yeah, first one was 2005. So the Painted Army, Warcry, Drone Machines. It looks like people in the metal scene started paying attention to him with Ursus Americanus and Women and Children. But, you know, these were guys who liked arty stuff, right? It wasn't just like... Yeah, you know, it was people with a pretty broad palette,
and then he gets on a Housecore, and then now my buddies who my bar buddies who listen to Lamb of God know him.
Really? Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So it originally, I think it was more of like I'm a metal guy who also like might listen to like Berlin techno or noise music or fucking like power electronics. Yeah. And now it's now the sort of heavy industrial rock undertone of it has been strong enough that it's basically performing in the niche that heavy industrial rock performed in the 90s.
Yeah, I would say so.
Like, it's not on the radio, but like neither is Lamb of God anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, Lamb of God never was on the radio, at least in my area.
I think I probably heard, Redneck a couple times on the radio,
yeah,
but that's
maybe
about
like late at night, like welcome to the Riff Dad with Ken the Maniac. What's up?
No,
right?
Actually, my local midnight show is what introduced me to Bolt Thrower, so there's actually a pretty cool gap there.
That makes sense.
That's Florida shit,
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're in the right spot for that. It's
But so let's focus it down a little bit. So you've never heard a full Author and Punisher record, I assume.
I think I barely heard any of it. I looked at the cover of Beastlands and was like, "Hey, that's a cool gas mask."
Okay, yeah, I've talked about him with you before, I think a few times. This record, Krüller, I think we've got fairly different opinions about this, but I think we hone in on the same things. I really, really like this record. This shows Author and Punisher going in kind of a different direction, really emphasizing, at least in parts, more melodic aspects. I think that there will be a confusion of terms, and people will call this synthwave in some part, which it is not. It really has more to do with 90s electronic soundtrack stuff, like the Terminator 2 soundtrack would be.
But that's a primary influence on synthwave.
Yeah, it's definitely an influence to synthwave, but I feel like here he is going directly back to the source. Terrence is almost 50, so he's got a more immediate connection to when that stuff was especially relevant. He's not like a Zoomer doing this,
That's fair. Also, synthwave inherently sounds trashy, and this doesn't sound trashy, so it makes sense. Yeah,
that's true. Well, what do you make of this? I mean, this is your first experience with him. I know you're not a huge fan, but what do you make of this in general?
I guess based on the little I knew of this guy, right, the sort of biomechanical setup, I was expecting maybe something more out there. I know in the notes that you said this is sort of like more melodic or whatever. I think that this is in some ways, it's unusual for the metal scene proper, maybe, especially for this. It's unusual for the metal scene proper, but this is very familiar to me because it sounds like heavy industrial music, the sort of the more melodic side of industrial music from around like 2012. Okay. It seems kind of musically conservative almost, or at least like part of a pretty established vein of more extreme electronic music for sure. There's lots of sub bass and noise effects on this, but it's all being used in a pretty listenable way. I would say this seems to me to fits in pretty well with bands like Youth Code or 3 Teeth. Do you know Youth Code?
Youth Code I don't, but I knew you were going to mention 3 Teeth, and I was watching an Author and Punisher video. Apparently he toured with 3 Teeth. So
Yeah. So Youth Code and 3 Teeth are these bands. Youth Code were from the hardcore scene. 3 Teeth, I think, were just internet weirdos, literal goths. And they started making. It was at the time when there was a bunch of very sort of cool, highbrow industrial techno and shit like Ancient Methods or Regis or Vatican Shadow or whatever. All that stuff was really big. Silent Servant. And there was, but it was pretty disconnected, say, from it was all very like, we're not that kind of industrial, right? Whereas, it's like real industrial. It was very like real industrial, techno, whatever, very austere. These people were like tapped into that level of, they had an interest in making stuff that was actually related to more authentic or extreme forms of industrial music, not just like Nine Inch Nails worship or Ministry stuff, but still relating it back much more to the sort of like 90s industrial metal or clubland kind of sound, like goth club sound. So they had, and they both incorporated really big, colorful hooks in a way that didn't sound like Michael Bay Transformers. I think you'd get a huge kick out of Youth Code. Three Teeth is a little more understated. I'm guessing they probably nailed their formula later. I only really listened to the first record. But they don't have... But what this has that those don't have is this is a lot slower, right? And it is also... makes more use of... They had highly modern production, but this has sub-bass, right? A lot of sub-bass, right? But which also places it related to another 2012 constellation, which is the kind of like heavy dubstep stuff that was taking root around London. On this show, we talk about one example of that, which is the fucking... I always call them Function, which is the name of the record.
Empty Set?
Yes, Empty Set. Yeah, Function is actually another techno band, or techno group. But, yes, Empty Set, right? Empty Set is the most sort of extreme metal version of that, the first Empty Set.
I love that. I have listened to them so many times since you introduced them to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had a big moment when I was listening to tons of shit like that, and in that sort of industrial techno stuff. So Empty Set is like the most extreme metal, the most like overtly god fleshy or whatever. But there was all these bands influenced, all these groups or producers influenced by Burial, and sort of connecting it to more heaviness, whether it was they were listening to Pantera or they were listening to Godflesh or both. And it was kind of like stuff that the Broderick scene had always been doing, like Techno Animal, but like with this sort of like dubstep, cyber Jamaican aspect. And it even verged into stuff like grime. There was a guy called Gaika who had these kind of like heavy, sort of like black cyberpunk, basically. Like sort of like heavy, is sort of like these kind of heavy dubsteppy Burial kind of beats with this sort of brooding, cigarettes in the rain kind of voice, right?
That sounds cool.
No, it was pretty cool. But it was like, so it was part of this sort of constellation of, that was like I think the last quantum leap in extreme music technology, especially with like, in absolute terms, like technology, was back then. With like sub-bass stuff and certain kinds of ways of noise manipulation and production. And this harkens back to the more melodic, colorful stuff at that time. And also to sort of things in the alt-rock or indie or synth music sphere a little earlier than that, which we both picked up on.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of all that, let's get to some samples. I'm not going to editorialize before it because I'm going to gush after it. Let's listen to a section off the first song on this album, which was also the lead single for the record, Drone Carrying Dread. it is pretty bold to start your record with obviously the best track on it, but this is just a huge song. Like, it's the earliest contender in my, like, Song of the Year, pseudo list I keep in my head. It's so evocative. It's so atmospheric. The lyrics are worth a discussion of their own, describing this sort of this fragmented, impressionistic kind of idea of, resource wars in the far post-apocalyptic future, just stories of, like, militias scrabbling over territory and stuff in this wonderfully abstract way. And this is, again, I get back to, say, Terminator 2 soundtrack, like kind of early 90s electronic soundtrack music. And just the idea of that, like, this is... I've talked before about the idea of, a song that can launch 1,000 bands. This is one of those. There's so much to dig out of this majestic, slow, unbelievably heavy, thematically rich stuff. I mean, you can make an album out of this song very easily.
It's definitely got... I like that it's as long as it is. It's like 8 minutes, so it's got this sort of immediate hook thing going on, but it carries on for a metal length of time, and there is some serious change-ups in the last 3 minutes or so. Like, stuff definitely happens over the course of the song.
There's that's one of the things that I think makes this distinctive.
It's not verse chorusy. It's vocally, he's nailed his own version of the sort of 90s yell shout, sort of 90s yell sing.
Yeah.
But, like, it's not like Nine Inch Nails.
It's interesting that you say that, because I feel like I can detect a direct line from Nine Inch Nails to this.
No, there is a direct line. I just mean that they're not being structured in this kind of punchy way.
Well, yeah,
I mean, of course, their album...
They're not trying to be tough or cool at all.
Well, and also just like, like Nine Inch Nails songs, there are album tracks that are really extreme. Like, we all remember Loving March of the Pigs, right? But, like, generally, they're, like, the big Nine Inch Nails tracks are very verse-chorus and, like, condensed 4-minute, get in and get out sort of
This is more like
deals.
Fragile or Broken or something.
Oh,
like
yeah, no,
EP
that's
stuff.
true.
Yeah.
God, it's been so long since I've really listened to Nine Inch Nails. I mean, Downward Spiral has stuff like that, too. I mean...
Yeah. I think this is a little bit closer to, like, the EP stuff where he's playing around a little bit more.
Indulgent, yeah. Like... Yeah, so, I mean, this is, the way the synths, the very lush aspect of the synths here, I think another thing that's big on this record, that is certainly big for Youth Code and Three Teeth, but this guy's, I'm sure, getting it right from the source in the way they were, is early Skinny Puppy.
Yeah.
Like Vivisect era. And if you listen to Vivisect, Skinny Puppy were always into barriers to access, right? That's why they influenced 1,000 Hot Topic people, but, like, never, ever themselves belonged in that world. Because,
we're pro Skinny Puppy on this show, I believe.
Yes, we're very pro Skinny Puppy. And so what I was just going to say is that Vivisect, I mean, God, if you want extreme music, listen to Too Dark Park. Jesus Christ.
Oh, what a weird record.
That's like, it'll just like, give you a seizure. But so Vivisect has these gorgeous sort of glassy kind of, sort of glassy dystopic cyberpunk synths with a lot of feeling in them, and a lot of just like raw power in the basic melodies and riffs. But because they're Skinny Puppy, they decided to make it all sound like breaking glass.
Yeah.
So it is. It's actually a record I've listened to a lot. But it is quite, it's demanding. This guy seems to have dug out that lush sense of melody and played it over a much broader canvas. And that's undeniably cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, this kind of relates to the stuff that I was talking about on our last episode with Syndexioi, which is, in the metal scene, we have a tendency to discount production and just, timbre and tinkering with sounds as, something like, I don't know, sort of indulgent or sort of, not real music in a sense. Mm-hmm. But stuff like Syndexio...
And to be fair, I often err on that side. Yeah.
No, I understand the impulse. Mm-hmm. It is it is fighting against a popular music, which is all about that exclusively. Yeah. But stuff like this or Syndexio is proof that we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Yes. There's a ton of artistic relevance to tinkering with these tones, to exploring tone color, and finding ways for that to reinforce narrative music. Which is why I would say, like, one of the things that makes this cool and makes this relevant to metalheads is that these are narrative songs.
This is very... I don't hear metal as narrative music in the way you do, or, like, as inherently narrative.
Okay.
It's a thing that's come up before a few times. But it definitely can be. I think it's I think I'm hearing more stuff that's moving in that direction. I mean, the next record we're about to review sounds like polar opposite of this, but is also very narrative.
Yeah, that's true.
The Kampfeswut. And, the Syndexio and the Vlada both had narrative structures. Although, like, fiercely homogenous sounds, but sort of narratives unfolding over the course of the record, especially the Vlada. This is, that sound tinkering you definitely hear paying off here. I mean, overall, this song, like, it's not as unfamiliar to me. There were bands doing that whose names I can't remember, doing songs like this 10 years ago.
Oh, dude, definitely look them up because I please inject this into my veins, black metal guy.
Yeah. Okay, there is stuff like it is. However, I mean, would they be doing it with quite the same? I mean, I could imagine Youth Code doing a slow one that is like this, but like, would someone? There's undoubtedly distinctive things about what this guy is doing. In part, his you can hear. There are a lot of people who swing for the... Yeah, but it's there in the other things, too. I would say, if anything, it's less in this record than I expected.
Okay.
This less, like, distinctly Godflesh stuff. There's none of the, like... To be fair, I don't listen to their later stuff that much, but there's not the sort of, like, uneasy harmony or the battering rhythms or the sort of, like, fried noise guitar. Right.
Yeah, this definitely has more to do with later Godflesh, I would say.
Yeah, it's and also I would assume maybe this can segue us in some way. Although who knows? Maybe this segues actually to your next sample. But
we could do mine. I mean, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, let's swing. Let's just do it. It makes sense. The other thing that's going to be on a lot of people's minds after hearing that is Jesus. So what I want to ask you is this how Jesus sounds?
I feel. Oh, go ahead.
Because I've barely, like, I remember, like, back in the day, I would give them a try once in a while, listen to one track, and be like, nope.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I like the first couple Jisoo records. Mm-hmm. I think they're pretty good for what they are, but Jisoo as a band has always been a matter of unfulfilled potential. Here we're going to go to a track called Maiden Star, which also connecting to something you said earlier. This is where you're going to get a lot of that alt and indie rock stuff. This is, to me, what Jisoo sounds like if they fulfill, the promise on the can. Yeah, so the way this relates to Jesu is obviously in that big kind of chorus part, this very, like, I hate it when people say this, but the blissed out major key stuff. It's, those are melodic structures that you would definitely hear on Jesu, but on Jesu, the edges would be softened even more. It would be like, we want really low bass tones, but we don't want you to be we don't want your heart rate to go over 80 BPM at any point on this, you know? I know that you don't really like this sample. I like it because, okay, so it's keeping up the melodic inflection that is more prominent on this record. But then, again, getting back to tone, just having those huge, distorted bass hits gives it dimension, and the blissed out stuff would be too much if that ate up the entire song. But, after that, you get into stuff that's a little bit more furtive, a little bit darker, still kind of accessible, still pop-oriented in a sense, but we're getting back into, as I've mentioned on a couple records that we covered over the past year or so, kind of like Smashing Pumpkins territory, like the kind of alt rock that I still really respect.
Yeah, I hear it connecting to Pumpkins for sure, and I do really like the Pumpkins. I guess for me, this is all really familiar. And this track is like, the melodies and harmonies here are, they connect to stuff I like Pumpkins. A band that's really good that they connect to is A Place to Bury Strangers. Do you know them?
No, not at all.
Oh, that's actually a name check. That's something people from this show should check out. That's stuff that if you were like in the metal or hardcore underground, you probably didn't quite notice. Okay. Because they were from the last remnants of when you could maybe have a touring indie band and make money. But the guy made pedals in a warehouse in Williamsburg, and his music was the band was like very aggressive shoegaze. Okay. They listed their influences as like, My Bloody Valentine, obviously, fucking Jesus and Mary Chain, like Motorhead, Venom, back way, way, way before it was cool for Williamsburg type people to do that shit. Or when it was only just becoming cool. And so Place to Bury Strangers is awesome. It has powerful noise stuff. Well, I guess a big band for them would be Loop, who were related to Godflesh, actually. But this sounds a bit like a Place to Bury Strangers song, but sort of much less aggressive.
Well, this whole discussion is kind of interesting because what you're pointing at is, a phenomena that we've talked about on the show. Like, for instance, when ISIS comes out, and we have to develop a term in the metal scene for it because nobody had heard post-rock or certain kinds of post-hardcore before. So maybe it's like you're talking about a lineage of stuff that you already know and understand, having access to different scenes that most of us may not have. Like we always say on the show, I'm the long hair. So
yes.
So the reference points you're talking about are probably really interesting to a lot of our listeners, but we just never hung out with those people,
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, people on the show have some idea of this probably, but, as a kid, I was into, like, punk and in a very expansive sense of the word and, like, sort of gothy stuff and post-punk and the sort of garage rock stuff at the time, some of which was quite extreme, check out the Hunches. But
I still remember some of the cool shit you showed me back in the day, like Milk,
Oh God, I forget Milk. That was after I was starting. That was when I was losing interest in that whole scene. But Milk, actually, I think I may have seen Milk at I think Death by Audio was the name of the Place to Bury Strangers guy's pedal company, and I think I saw Milk at Death by Audio.
That was cool. You talked
like he
to
had a
me about
venue,
them, and I was like,
yeah.
"Oh, dude!" And it's like, well, this is weird. This is like grunge and kind of punk, but I don't hate it. What are these changes in my growing body? You know?
Yeah. Milk was a solid sort of like catchy heavy rock and roll band, right? Yeah, that was. Yeah, Death by Audio. I'm right. Yes, it was also where the effects pedal company was based. So I saw them play at the Place to Bury Strangers guys venue. Yeah. So exactly. So there's stuff from that lineage that I was tuned into. You know, like or when I was like 15, I really liked Interpol. I mean, still do. The first record is great. Everything else after that is trash.
Yeah, that first record's really good.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece. I'd love to talk about it on a bonus sometime. But basically, I was tapped into this whole thing that was sort of like punk music that wasn't part of like the crusty or hardcore underground, as well as like listening to. I also like got into Converge and shit at that time, right? And was also all sorts of other stuff. But like so that's kind of my background. And so by the time I was first getting into black metal and shit, I was still paying attention to some of that stuff. And so that's where I have some of these reference points from. But yeah, this guy's really drawing on a whole lineage of sort of like lush 90s kind of lush 80s and 90s all stuff. Or another thing from that era that this record's a lot like is M83. Okay. Now M83 mostly we know all from that song Midnight City, which is just makes me want to die. But before that, M83 was one of those bands that like deserved to be huge. Like they got huge because they deserved it. Yeah. And it was this sort of phenomenal music that was kind of like it was pastiche for sure. It was like his dream vision of everything cool about the 80s. But like sort of like glorious kind of shoegaze meets New Order songs or something. Shoegaze is 90s. That's why pastiche. There's a lot of 90s stuff in it too, and like Kate Bush in it and things like that. So he did this pop record, and before that, it was a duo, and he did sort of powerful analog synth music that actually often was kind of metal. And a lot of the harmonies in this are kind of like the early M83 stuff and also the later M83 stuff.
Well, now, it's funny that you say that because there's like a Portishead cover on this record,
Exactly. Yeah, I gotta say, I feel that one is a misstep. But
I'm not a huge fan of it. I get where he's coming from, but
it's a statement. You know what I mean? It's like you don't need to explain to us what you're doing.
I feel you.
Yeah. Like Maiden Star explains it, and also seems to be named after what's that? Something Star? Isn't that a Portishead or Massive Attack song?
Or are you just thinking of Mazzy Star? Or?
No, well that's the band, but like, isn't there some like song like Blank Star?
I mean, maybe. I only listen to Portishead covers.
I only listen to them at parties. It's Portishead is music that I encounter. But
we should probably listen to more music just for the sake of time. Sorry, this is all good stuff. But we're running long.
That's true. We should go to bed. All right, let's listen to one more. So. Basically, that sounds like that's like a version of stuff I know, but it's a version of it that I don't like very much. And the way the vocal melodies work in Maiden Star just reminds me too much of like straight up indie rock. It has kind of like a woo-wee-you thing, a cascading woo-wee-you. It's just a more manly version of that. But it was a vocal pattern that was everywhere for about a decade, and I still have. I'm still.
You're dealing with the trauma.
Exactly, I'm dealing with the trauma. So let's go listen to something that's more matches your first pick. So Drone Carrying Dread seems to really go with Centurion.
Okay.
And I feel like this is another one of the highlights for me. that is really cool.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, it's I should have expected that you would have gone with the one that's most like a black metal song in a way.
How so?
Oh, something about this. It's obviously like it's an electronic industrial take on it, but these tense kind of like third motions in the melody. Yeah, it's I don't know. There's something that strikes me as like it's the same sort of intervals you hear in a Mayhem song.
It's very fluid, and the sense of time is so different, but I hear what you mean. Like, you could trem it out. Like, blah, blah,
yeah.
Blah, blah. Yeah, yeah, I mean, I hear that. I also think the vocal performance here is phenomenal. Like, what he does here, and in some places on Drone Carrying Dread, and in some other places through the record, is often he's fully on the sort of alt sing-yell. Mm-hmm. Here he's doing that, but with Godflesh in the back of it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. He's doing Broderick Bellow singing, which is, I'm sure, quite difficult to do. And he's doing it with he's not just like hitting root, he's not just like bringing out the tone in it. He's following a melody.
Yeah.
While remaining with very deep fry. So, I mean, Amoebix is kind of like that, but, you know, much more, much less controlled. Right? This is, so that's pretty cool. And it's, and the lyrics are cool. It's something about, something ready for the siege, something forlorn centurion, something like American Legion, blood in the streets. Maybe, did he say blood in the sheets? I don't know. Everyone's cursing. There is something about some sort of like, some sort of militant defender of some order of some kind, right? Who is feeling like, who's sort of lost his place in the world and is watching it collapse. Yeah. Right? It reminds me almost of, I don't play this game, but is this like a reference to Caesar's Legion and Fallout?
Possibly. Caesar's Legion is more like expansionist and imperialistic, but one thing I did want to associate with this that might make this make more sense is this is a COVID record, and especially apparently the initial kind of stems of these songs were done during the riots in 2020.
Yeah, I was wondering if it kind of had something to do with that too.
Yeah, I think that this whole sort of like global or societal collapse thing is running throughout this music. I mean, that's always been any sort of industrial kind of cyberpunky stuff like this is going to have that as a background aspect, but it really comes to the forefront on this record more than others, I think.
And I would say on this track in particular.
Yeah.
It's watching the place you thought you knew crumble around you and wondering if you're obsolete, right? And the weird thing, I just want to say I think we don't even need to, because we've taken so much time, I'm not even sure we need to go to my last sample. That's just some more drum and bassy stuff. But the Easter egg I want to throw in here in relation to 90s alt stuff is there was something about those lyrics that reminded me of, I think, the lead single on the last Tool record. Which was something about, it was Maynard singing something about, it was basically lyrics about, like, being old but getting back in the trenches. Kind of this meta thing about, like, oh God, here we go doing a Tool tour again. But also speaking more broadly, I think, to just, like, a sort of stoic but realistic approach to middle age, and a feeling that, one is like, it's basically like has lyrics about sucking your gut in. And it's something, that sense of like, that sense of sort of values persisting after their moment, or disorientation, or loss of relevance or whatever is sort of here too. And the weird thing is, I looked up it's feat Justin Chancellor. Who's Justin Chancellor? Oh, he's the bassist of Tool.
Yeah. And there's another song with Danny Carey on it.
Oh, that's right. That's where Danny. I forget their names. Yeah. So there's there's half of Tool on this.
Yeah.
Now that I know that, I have to listen to the whole thing again. All right, and we are back from chuckling about Thaw and Youth Code to discuss Kampfeswut. That is the Wut, or rage, or wrath, or, craziness of struggle. And this is des Barden Schwarzer Gesang, Old Mill, which would probably mean something like the Song of the Black Bards or something. I don't know.
Something of that effect, yeah.
Yeah. I can't. Yeah. Which of those is genitive? Yeah. Whatever. Bards. Black metal. And this is out on Old Mill Productions. This is, in the word, as I was talking about with Reese, and Reese confirms this is the most aggressive thing Old Mill has released. Now, some of the Hollyruna stuff actually gives them a run for their money. But this is a strange and interesting record in that really, I wrote in the notes, have we ever heard a record move so seamlessly from calm D&D session to drunk powerlifting? Right? You're like, instead of drinking water, you're just drinking.
Well, it's a record that kind of like embodies everything within this field. It was interesting looking at like their Bandcamp describing themselves as like in some sense like a dungeon synth band, which is like I guess I can kind of see that, but I also think of it as just like cool folk interludes on Abigor albums and stuff,
Well, I think it really fits with... So what we should say up front is that this is a strangely structured album, extremely narrative. The sort of the first track introduces us to some of the more aggressive ideas, which then really don't come back full bore until the last 5 tracks. Mm-hmm. And the last one's an outro, I think. But it moves from really well executed sort of acoustic stuff with authentic Germanic folk underpinnings and sort of like folk metal-y choruses of a certain kind occasionally. It moves towards just like extremely brutal and aggressive sort of like fighting music at the end. Mm-hmm. So the way it's one of those sort of, I get why they say dungeon synth, because it's like a form, right? It's one of those how are they structuring it things, just like we were, it's how are they structuring it? We were debating that about Korova last night, right? But like this is structure. This is like the Hollyruna stuff, in that it's structured in this sort of different songs play different roles. They sound very different, but they're on this continuum that has a similar melodic sensibility. Or like the Syndexioi. This is after kind of different. It's very engaged with the BM tradition, but it's after kind of a different affect. Mm-hmm. Or, it's narrative like the Vlada. Again, we're just starting to get all this stuff that is firmly of the tradition that just doesn't really sound like anything done before. I mean, the main reference point the main overall reference point for this is clearly absurd. But only in the very general outline. That is later absurd, right? The music before Blutgericht is just terrible.
we were talking about that the other night, yeah.
Yeah, we think the Germans have this thing. Absurd and what's the other one? A Nargaroth, right? They're like bands that are like they're bands that have an extremely patchy catalogs but have been really influential on good bands. Mm-hmm. And so Absurd really only sort of figures out what they're all about more than halfway through their career. And then they get this idea of German black metal as sort of modern bardic song, right? That also really influences Horn, who was one of the first things we ever reviewed on this show.
It was on the first
episode ever. Yes. So Horn would be an intermediary, and I think you can hear some direct Horn influence from him in that it sort of takes the folk elements in the music way more seriously. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't really sound like either of those bands because both of them are focused on just sort of like pummeling, stomping, stomping through the mountains, pushing trolls over kind of songs, right? This is really just, there's way more just actual folk in it, and it way more has one of these kind of soundscapey, narrative dungeon synthy things. I don't know, how do you hear it?
I get a lot of what you're saying, and I think it's all correct. I think that just based off my listening experience, I can think of other things that I'm connecting this to that are especially German. Not even the sense of like German folk, but German metal in general that kind of accesses folk. One band that I brought up on the show, very obscure, deep cut things, but we used them as an interlude one time, Dais, which is a very cool kind of like black folk power metal band that not a lot of people know. Another band that apparently I introduced you to, which was Eisregen.
Oh, wait, honestly, dude, I feel like, Dais, or I thought of one of these bands when I heard this.
Mm-hmm. It was probably Dais. Eisregen is a little bit gothier, so...
Got it. Oh, yeah, no, I remember Eisregen. Eisregen is trench coat. Yeah.
Extremely trench coat.
Yeah, no, okay, I remember Dais. So, yes, this is like those. Go on.
Or maybe even something that was like kind of cool in the mid-2000s and is totally forgotten now. Have you ever heard a band called Die Apokalyptischen Reiter? The Apocalypse Riders?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think I've seen the name, but that's just because we've seen every name at this point.
Well, they were like a pretty prominent, I believe German, maybe Austrian, folk metal band from the mid-2000s, kind of before the big folk metal wave of the late 2000s. And I can hear a little bit of that here. So this is definitely drawing off of all the things you're talking about, but it's also drawing off a lineage of kind of Teutonic folk metal. Which tends to be heavier and more aggressive than the things we think of as folk, like the Finnish lineage of folk stuff, which is like blech. But
yeah,
Finland has done plenty of great metal, but folk metal was never their fucking strong suit. So yeah, definitely the absurd thing. We were talking about absurd the other night about how.
Dais actually shared a member with Absurd, although the Metal Archives insists the lyrical themes are not the same.
I don't know.
That's ancient Metal Archives.
My German is completely failed me in recent years. Trying to relearn Spanish. So yeah, I think we're both talking about things that are influential here. We just have different experiences, but together we can patch together a sort of lineage. You've got this, stompy oi folk black metal stuff on your side, and I've got this kind of like similar DNA, but coming from a more almost like heavy and power metal.
Yeah, more sort of heavy metal-ish, more sort of more accessible, less. Yeah.
More long hair stuff. And I think the important thing is how this band fuses these things together, because I really fucking like this record. I think it's still kind of gestational in a way.
Yeah,
but
definitely, yeah.
But that's one of the things that makes it exciting, because I can see into the future. I'm looking into my orb, and I can imagine what this project does in 5 years, and it's going to be fucking unbelievable, because this is super fun and cool now. I'm going to show this to some of my friends that are into stuff like this, and they're going to be really stoked about it. Like, this is a really wonderful fusion of just like straight party drinking music as well as legitimate artistic craft, which is, I think, what Terminus is about. That's the ideal record for us.
Absolutely. Oh, wait, one more name drop that falls in somewhere in this, kind of closer to your side, but with blast beats. Heimdall's Wacht.
I might be dimly familiar with the name, but no, not really.
He's close with the Hidden's Heart guy, but or they are close with the Hidden's Heart guy, but they are sort of like they would be called black metal now, but it's like a lot like Winterland. And it's like Winterland meets the kind of stomping, rocking folk metal stuff you're talking about. And so back in the day, they might get called melodic Black Death or something, like, or heathen, just pagan metal or something.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely talk about some of the maybe outside black metal influences here a little bit later. But
so we better get into the tracks. So, let's start off. This is this is just, first full track, good sense of the range, the spectrum of feelings on the first part of the record. This is Der Ruf der Berggeister.
Es wird Nacht, fort ist die Farbenpracht, finster und schwer stehen sie umher, schwarz-blau mit düsteren Stirnen, selbst die weißen Föhnen leuchten nicht mehr. Obwohl sie schaut empor, ein Hauch ragt vor, über alle und taucht in des Lichtquells letzten fliehenden Schein den Scheitel ein, zart, lichtweisig und rosig angehaucht.
So that's a really good example of event-driven songwriting. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like the song is about a certain event, which is the gigantic summoning chorus that is the entire middle of the song.
Yeah, the mountains.
Yep. And, I can tell that this is another one of those how far down the neo-folk martial industrial iceberg are you? Because when I hear that disco beat behind it, I'm just like, yeah, the mountains.
Well, it's interesting because, like, kind of what we were talking about in the intro to this section, like, you can get there from completely different paths. Because I can definitely see the whole neo-folk leading to this idea, but it's also totally contiguous with just straight Germanic folk black stuff that I've heard back in the 2000s. So, I mean, maybe they're listening to each other or something, but yeah, that's something that's very interesting. This record kind of splits the difference between these. I mean, that fits with Old Mill, right? The idea of, the folk stuff and the black metal stuff not being different. Not being separate ideas, which is definitely conveyed by this record as a whole.
Would a German folk metal band do the disco beat?
Oh yeah, the German
I guess
ones,
that's what makes it folk metal, huh?
the German ones are the most likely to do the disco. In fact, they can never get away from that like Deutsch disco thing,
Right. You're sort of like polka. You're sort of like dancing to the accordion, but sort of just like grooving. It's okay. Well, that makes sense. But yeah, the actual folk stuff, right, is well done, right? The whole song it's like mountains. It's sort of flat, and then there's the mountains, and then it gets kind of flat again. But the folk stuff is not just there as pure intro and outro, right? It lingers on the folk stuff at the end.
Well, it's like you wrote in the notes, and I think it's a very good way to phrase it. It has inherent interest. It's not it's not there to perform a function. It is a full part of the song.
Yeah, it's not there to like walk it out or to tell you it's folky. Yeah, it's written out, and there's some relationship to real German folk music. There's the accordion stuff, and you can in neo-folk you could relate it to some of the more authentic sounding stuff like Wundwasser, who came out last year. I have a hard time believing these guys probably are aware of him. But that was an honorable mention. That was a non-metal mention for me on last year's year end. Or like the early of the Wand and the Moon stuff or something. But yeah, it's quite nice.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's the thing. It's like, these guys make it really fucking cool, Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of neo-folk stuff that I respect, but it's also like, I have never been in the mood for this in my entire life. Here it's like, oh yeah, this folk shit, I can party to this. Let's go.
Well, yeah, in some sense it makes it less cool, right?
Yeah,
it makes it more immediate, more fun. Yeah, I mean, the two things I named you'd probably get a kick out of, but especially of the early of the Wand and the Moon. That's kind of weird party music.
I've heard that name a bunch of times, but I've never listened to it. Yeah,
but yeah. So your pick.
So I've got a pick kind of like yours in that it explains the record. This is kind of an odd one because it's a short song. We'll listen to the whole thing, and it's an instrumental. It's called Sedna zu Grund, and what's interesting to me is that this really dovetails, I think, both of our perspectives on this, because you've got this like very true folk black thing going on in the song, but you've also just got Amon Amarth. You've got like accessible party music, and I think one of the profound strengths of this band, because I'm really into this record, is the fact that they don't see those as separate things. These are all, again, I've said this a few times already, but all of these ideas are contiguous with each other. This guy does not perceive any of these. He doesn't perceive himself as bridging gaps between ideas. Yeah. He's like, this all makes sense to go together, and god damn it, when you listen to a song like this, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, we've kind of talked, I mean, at some point in however many episodes, about how the distinction between, you know, supposed high art and low art is completely artificial. Like, there's no reason you should not be able to incorporate just sick, cool, long hair stuff like Old Amonomarth with your dramatic and legitimately informed take on folk black metal.
Yeah, you hear that here. I mean, this is such a weird song. So people listening to that in isolation might think like, I mean, if you listen to it in isolation, it kind of sounds like it just builds to nowhere, right? We get the big sort of tandem guitar thing, and then when it gets more intense is when like the nickel harp or whatever it is comes back in, right?
Yeah,
the sawed folk harp, which is really cool. That's a very like at the gates thing to do, almost like you have the violin part be the brutal part. But then it just sort of fades out again. And the reason that's not just a blue ball is because all these songs sort of depend on each other.
Yeah. I was about to get into basically that idea, which is, so one thing that's really cool about this record that I think should be expanded upon and maybe even intensify is this kind of micro song aspect of it. Mm-hmm. A lot of these songs are super short. And there's a sort of like youthful spontaneity about them where it's like, hey, I've got this one really cool part. So why not just record that part? I'm not going to fluff it out with 4 more riffs. I have this one idea I want to communicate, and I'll do some variations and I'll play around with it, but it's done in under 2 minutes. And again, why not? Why the artificial restriction that we have to make it a real song by padding it out to 5 minutes? Because honestly, a lot of these sub 2 minute compositions feel more complete than fucking most of the 5 minute songs I've listened to in my life, you know?
Yeah, say it's avoiding a problem that, say, a lot of things in the Franco-Finnish, sort of in the second and third tier of Franco-Finnish style stuff get into, right? Which is sort of just like, well, damn, we have this cool chorus riff. Oh, God, now we have to write a song. Like, you know, like, oh, God, here comes the verse. Okay, there's the chorus. All right, here's the slow part in 6/8. Okay, here we go back. Phew. We're at the chorus again.
Can you not just describe a song that I wrote, please? On the show? You're literally describing the exact structure of one of my songs.
my technique is just play the low string over and over again.
Honorable, diligent.
Anyway, so that's it. It's yes, there is nothing. It eliminates the need for any sort of phoned-in structure. There are occasionally tracks like Imvald that are more elaborate black metal structures, which that one's weirdly in French. Those are the lyrics. But it's not most of them. You know, it's rare for something to go above 3 minutes. And I like this. It's just sort of punky. You could imagine that they would sound underdone, but they don't.
No, they feel like very complete ideas. And
the guy from Molested and Borknakar wrote very short songs. I was thinking the other day, like under 4, consistently.
I mean, I was saying my dream for this band is to do a suite of a record of like 30, 90-second songs.
Yeah, no, I think that's like feasible for this guy.
That would be sick. Wouldn't that be fucking sick, dude?
It would be sick. You know, yeah, you could throw in a few longer ones, and in that context, a song that's like 4 or 5 minutes long would feel like an epic. Oh, you know, Isatai did this too, and I really liked that about Isatai.
That's true, yeah.
Theirs are a little bit longer because you need more time to let those just big, heavy riffs rock out. But, like, you know, that's Isatai is thrashy, kind of, in, you know, a primal black metal way. You just need time to headbang. But, like, they're done, almost all of them, before 4 minutes. Mm-hmm. So this is a good example of a record that releases arbitrary heavy metal arbitrary long hair ideas about song length, while mobilizing every long hair trick in the book
It's
to fill in those songs.
The ultimate long hair, short hair combination.
Yeah, in some way the song, exactly, yeah, powers combined. In some way the song is the whole, like, you talk about heavy metal as narrative music, right? That's a very long hair idea, like Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Well, you know what, each individual song is just a thing happening, but the whole record is the narrative. And so speaking of which, right, for the entire first part of the record, I've listened to this while walking around outside, and it's literally just like, hey, this is regular life. It's like, I am walking over boring fields. I am stopping in at a tavern. I am exchanging gossip with a peasant. Right? And then you get to, maybe having an emotion at the mountains, right? And then we get to, where's the real place where the pedal hits the metal? It's kind of like, I think it's this, maybe Gesang von Sternenlichte, but I think it's Die Verführung des Johann Faustus, which might mean, what is Verführung? Is this about like when Faust steps outside? Because that would be awesome. We were talking about Faustian black metal yesterday with fucking Korova.
Yeah, it's one of those agglutinative words.
Seduction. The seduction of Faustus. Okay, good. So, yeah, when Faustus is sort of given the Mephistophelian promise, let's hear Shit Gets Real.
Was jetzt los? Andere Männerei oder was? No gut. Mein Teufelswerk durch trotzdem. Doch der Jod baut aus, was du nicht mehr zu tun. Die Welt, die Verstand, ein Werk von toten Körpern, nur Symbole auf die Wissenschaft und Glauben verbannt. Alchemie, Yoga, sowas, Zauber allerhand. Weil da keine Heilung für das nagende Herr. Noch verleugnet das unsere Täter. Nicht alle Bücher aus dem Feuer verbannt. Doch die heilige Schrift, so lässt in der Brand.
So, Thor, Odin's son, protector of mankind. Right. Yeah, it's, right. That's definitely not above some late Amon Amarthism. But even more than that, like, a thing that you often say, but that this reminded me of, is like, this sounds like metalcore. Like, not in a bad way. Almost like...
No, I get it, yeah.
Like brutal German metalcore, right? This is like a Heaven Shall Burn energy.
I was about to say Heaven Shall Burn.
Putting half blasts under like shortened, furiously clipped Amon Amarth riffs. That's like their career.
Yeah.
And it's done so, and I love that, right? I that whole sort of apocalyptic German metalcore sound is awesome. And it really works here. And God, there's a lot to talk about with this song. So, the overall thing is kind of like there's not a single black metal riff on it. but it's a black metal song, obviously, being created by, like, this merger of, like, folk metal, metalcore, and, like, war metal half-blasts. You know? I mean, like, normally you'd hear those in, like, a fucking, you know, like, Diocletian song or something. And the really cool things happen structurally. You heard me sort of, like, shout in the middle of the track, right?
You do that a lot, to be fair.
True. Yes, I do a lot of shouting. You also got moshed by your cat.
Yeah. My cat bit my foot.
He was. Yeah, this is
entranced by the riffs.
Entranced by the riffs. So berserking. But the you know, there's this kind of, like, the beginning of the song is pretty high energy, sort of folk metal type stuff, and then it just stops, right? Basically, it does a grindcore or hardcore thing. It just stops, and then it's like, this is the new song now. Yeah. And you just, the half blast comes in, and the sort of this, like, metalcore Amon Amarth riff. And then when he introduces the half blast, right? This is, again, it's like that thing with, like, the folk having inherent interest. Using a half blast in a context like this, outside of a few very restricted types of music, which I love, would be. I'm a huge half blast guy. I'm always advocating for the underrepresented half blast. It's usually used to change things up, right? It's like, well, I've been blasting for 8 bars, time to do a half blast or something, right? Or it's used as punctuation, or maybe as a climax, right? Here, it's just where the song picks up momentum. And it's this beat that's often deliberately used as a kind of static plateau, and there's, like, one riff over it, and then the riff changes. Here, that's where the development happens. So it's just this really steady pulse, and it's almost like rediscovering blast beats in a really cool way. It's like rediscovering the joy of, like, yes, you can just do this over and over again. It's,
No, yeah, I get that, and I think I'm gonna get at a lot of similar ideas with my next sample, because we're gonna talk a little bit more about technical performance in general. So I'm gonna play the song actually immediately after yours. This one's called Freiheit with a question mark, apparently. So let's listen to this one, and then I'm going to talk about guitar performance specifically.
Lasst euch sehen, Repräsentanten des Volkes und die Diktator heute scheitern mit einem Sachen Demokratie. Lügen verdammte Ehrlichkeit, die uns verkaufen und was von solidarischen Realität wie ihr Konto, das will ich bemerken. Los, Freiheit ist Liebe, Freiheit ist Recht, zum Menschenfeind und alle Seelenknecht. Bewaffnet steht ihr des Todes offen, und Achtung den Gesetzen, wann sie rufen. Achtung Prozent und unser Menschenpflicht, denn sie verletzt die Freiheit nicht. Die Absicht, Mauern zu richten oder Menschen entgegen ihren Willen zu verpflichten. Nein, all das sind widerwärtige Lügen. Dafür müssen wir die Antidemokraten rügen. Ich sag euch, Leute, unser höchstes Gut ist die Freiheit, die in der Stolz und Tod sich aufgründet. Sehr gewaltiger Kampf, Unrecht zu brechen in all ihrer Macht. Freiheit ist Liebe, Freiheit ist Recht, zum Menschenfeind und alle Seelenknecht. Bewaffnet steht ihr des Todes rufen, und Achtung dem Gesetz hört man sie rufen. Achtung Prozent und unser Menschenpflicht, denn sie verletzt wirklich die Freiheit nicht.
So, something that I think is really cool about this record, and I think should be explored more by other metal bands. It's a little bit weird to talk about, but I'll try to phrase it as best I can. You know, because I'm a guitarist. I play guitar in a black metal band. There tends to be a tendency in metal guitarists where you reach a certain point in your technical skill, and you're playing, I'm saying, kind of arbitrarily within 30% of that. Like, you tend not to stick with very simple stuff once you get to a certain level. What makes this music interesting is that the whole range of this guy's technical ability is represented. And more specifically, there's a tendency to sit around the mid-range of his technical ability as the center point of his riffing style. Mm-hmm. So you'll have very simple stuff, but then occasionally you'll have pretty, honestly, challenging right-hand rhythm work, like you'll hear across this song a lot. So, sort of in the sense of like classical music, volume is used as a kind of dynamic feature.
I see what you mean.
Yeah. Or, for instance, I remember maybe a year
So
back,
he's using technique as a dynamic.
He's using technique as a dynamic. I was talking to another guitarist maybe a year ago. We were both talking about like playing on extended range guitars, like 7 or 8 strings. And we were talking about how, the problem is in metal, your tendency is your starting point is your lowest string on an open note, But that only gives you one direction to go. So we were talking about the idea of, well, yeah, I'm playing on an 8 string, but I'm starting most of these riffs like on the E string. So I can go up, I can go down, I can play in a more three-dimensional space doing that. And I think he's doing that with technique. These explosive kind of flourishes are not happening on every track. He has room to move up and down in technicality. So the sort of restraint that he's showing in exercising that is really good for the dynamics of the record. It makes it more like folk or classical music. There's an entire range to explore. There's very simple stuff, there's very complex stuff, and you should probably be sitting somewhere around the middle. And I think that it makes those moments of technicality way more exciting when they're kind of rare.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's he's not. I'll probably try to get to this in more detail at another point because I'm sure an opportunity will present itself. But something I've been thinking about the sort of, say, the Syndaxioi or Halyaruna or a lot of stuff we've been seeing lately, or even in a way the Serpent Dweller, is like, you can tell we're getting beyond black metal because black metal is starting to not be the thing that's setting the ultimate formal parameters. It's becoming a set of techniques within a toolkit.
Oh, yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Like, people are starting to figure out other ways of forming things, and then they will just, like, it's like black metal makes the move from, like, style to technique. And that happened when black metal sort of took over thrash and death metal technique, right? It's like you would still hear plenty of thrash and death metal in the first 5 years of black metal, but like it was no longer what was calling the shots in terms of how the songs were structured.
No, I agree. I was thinking about that when you were talking about the Serpent Dweller demo. Just in the idea that, again, this seems like a little bit reductive, but just think about age. Think about the Zoomers that you might know. Yeah. I'm pretty active in my local scene, so I know a lot of Zoomers who have grown up with black metal as just like background radiation since they started with metal. There was no progression into black metal for them. It was just always there. So they've internalized certain lessons about riffcraft and songwriting, that kind of thing, that are things that me, a guy that's a little bit older that had to progress into black metal, still kind of reaches for in a deliberate way.
I see what you mean, yep.
As a result, the musical results are going to be different. And, it's kind of up to us to. I mean, in a certain sense, you have to accept it. The interpretation of those ideas is going to be different. It's just part of the fabric of heavy metal now.
Oh, yeah. I don't mean it as a bad thing. I think, I think the question is, obviously, people should always keep playing traditional black metal in a variety of styles, but, one proof of the fertility of a style is does it sort of go beyond itself? And this is especially once the term becomes so capacious, it now refers to like a billion different things, some of which are mortally opposed to each other.
Eichensarg, mein neues Heim. So soll dies denn meine Schicksale sein. Mich haben mir Freunde eingeladen, werden mir stumm zur Seite stehen, wenn ich mich bis zur letzten Ruhe um meinen letzten Weg zu gehen. Bald werden die Tablettenwirkungen zeigen, werde müde mir die Äugelein reiben, dann schließe ich sie ein letztes Mal und alles andere wird mir scheißegal. Jetzt ist es Zeit, die Reise anzutreten. Wär ich gläubig, würde ich jetzt beten. Doch so bleibt mir nur den Deckel zu schließen. Ohne Reihe, ohne Tränen zu vergießen. Ich höre, wie Erde auf mich fällt. Es ist kalt hier am Ende der Welt. Kann meine Augen nicht mehr offen halten. Kann kaum die Hände vor der Brust noch falten. Nun lasst mich faulen, der Würmer fraß. Mein letzter Atemzug, mein letzter Spaß. Bald wird mein Fleisch wieder Erde sein. Und sie verseuchen mit seinem Schlag.